Hi, I'm Kyle Webster from Adobe. I'm so excited that all Creative Cloud subscribers now have full access to my entire library of brushes in the latest version of Photoshop. And most of these brushes will also work in Photoshop Sketch on the iPad, which means you'll be able to paint with rich, gooey oils, create timeless gouache illustrations, make a pointillist masterpiece in minutes, draw with any kind of pencil, pastel, or inking tool you can imagine, and even mix your media for surprising and exciting results. Let's get started with some basics right now. As a Creative Cloud subscriber, you now have access to over 1,200 brushes in Photoshop. There are so many brushes that it's impossible to cover the full library in the time that I have in this video. I just want to do a short overview of the brush sets themselves so you have a little familiarity with what you now have available to you. The Mega Pack, we'll start there, is the largest set in the group, and it includes tools for drawing and inking and painting and some special effects. It has erasers and even has some technical pens, and you'll be able to drill down into the set through each folder, as you can see here. The new brushes panel allows us to organize our brushes and to include all of the smudge tools, the mixer brushes, everything in one nice grouping. The watercolor set, which is the second largest set, has over 130 different wet media emulation tools. You can see how they look with a brushstroke preview, just like all the other sets. And each of them will give you a different wet media effect. Really fun to draw with. Give those a try. The concept brushes are for anybody who needs to do special effects work really fast. Lots of different foliage options, textures and patterns and clouds even. You can do all kinds of amazing things with these. The lettering brushes are for lettering artists, and there are over 100 different tools in here, different kinds of split nibs and dotted nibs, brush pens, calligraphy tools. A lot of them have fixed angles, which allow you to quickly write without having to worry about the angle of the brush changing, so that you can be consistent all the way throughout your lettering. The dry media set includes pastels, pencils, charcoal, Conte crayon even. Really, it's just a mix of any kind of dry media drawing tool you can imagine. Many of these sets also include smudge tools built right in. So if I can draw, I can also come down and choose one of my smudge tools and smudge my drawing as well. Next, we have the Impressionist brushes. These allow you to make impressionistic brush strokes very rapidly. They also allow the color to change slightly with every new brush stroke. I'll demonstrate that quickly with the Cezanne brush. You can see that as I paint, the color changes a little bit with each brush stroke. For the marker lovers out there, there are over 50 different art markers you can draw and color with. The halftone brushes are something that were revolutionary when they were released because they allow you to control the density of the pattern that you're painting with pen pressure. The crosshatch brushes provide you with many different ways to do crosshatching very quickly in your work. The direction of each pattern changes at random, and there are again over 50 different options in this set. Another very handy tool for illustrators and comic book artists. The manga brush set has finer inking tools, a special selection of new halftone patterns, as well as some special effects brushes. For example, action lines. These will respond to the direction in which you draw, so they can be rotated. There's a very useful technical pen called Tech Pen Super that comes in this set as well. And it's probably the most realistic technical pen that I designed while making all of these brushes. The spatter brushes contain over 60 different spatter tools, each of them with a completely different effect. And the brush strokes are random. These are not typical stamp brushes. So as you can see, whatever I draw, I get a completely different set of marks, just like real spatter. The rake brushes allow you to do different rake patterns in your work. There are over 50 of these to play with. The gouache brushes allow you to do opaque painting or semi-opaque painting, depending on the tool you're using, with subtle texture and lots of control over your brush strokes. Here's an example of what these look like. Now this brush, which is part of the G series, allows you to use the pen tilt to control how much of a dry brush effect you get. When your brush is more upright, there's less dry brush happening. The same goes for any of the brushes in the G series. More pen tilt, drier effect. Less pen tilt, more thick paint. For those who do not have pen tilt, don't worry. There are 18 brushes in the set that do not react to pen tilt at all. All you have to do is use your pen pressure to control the effect you get when you paint, like so. The runny inkers are a special set of drawing tools that give you dotty and blotty lines. Again, these are completely randomized, so no two lines are alike. Finally, we have the copier brushes, and these are a special set of brushes designed to emulate the feel of photocopy art. It's difficult to describe how these work until you actually try drawing with them, but with a lot of pressure, you get a darker line, but you can also come back over an area where you were working and scrub away the line that you already made, as long as you do it all in the same stroke. So you can get some very interesting textured effects with these brushes. Now let's move on to talking about pen pressure and pen tilt. Using different amounts of pressure when you're drawing with your stylus will yield different results depending on the brush you're using. Some of the inking tools will give you a fine line with a light amount of pressure, and a thicker line when you use heavier pressure. And of course, you get everything in between, from very, very fine to very thick. Other brushes will react to pen pressure by creating more of a scattering effect for the brush. For example, with the Real Watercolor Spatter Opaque brush, if I use a very small amount of pressure, I get very little scattering going on. However, when I increase the pressure, more of the marks scatter around the page. Other brushes will let you change the opacity of the stroke you're making depending on how much pressure you're using. Again, with the Real Watercolor set, there's a brush called Stain Control, for example, that will, with light pressure, give you a very faint mark, like so. But I can also build up to a darker mark using more and more pressure until I can get to something that's almost pure black. Still, other brushes will give you a texture effect depending on how much pressure you use. For example, with the Pastella brush, which is in the drawing box in the Mega Pack, a light amount of pressure will reveal more of the texture of the paper, like so. As I increase pressure, I get a darker mark with less of the paper texture coming through. It's important to try and experiment with pen pressure with all the brushes that you select to see how the pressure will affect the mark that you make. Other brushes even have special effects that are tied to how much pressure you use. For example, in the Real Watercolor set, the Womazing series of brushes allow you to not only add paint, but also to remove it. If I come over to this corner and start scrubbing with very light pressure, I can actually take away paint that was just added. This is all done with one stroke. In other words, I don't lift the stylus off the surface while I'm drawing. I leave it there with very, very faint contact, and then I scrub away an area. So I can add in one stroke, come back to where I was, and start scrubbing to remove paint all within the same stroke. This allows you to create very realistic watercolor edges and control how much of the paint remains on the surface and how much gets pulled out. Some tablets will also recognize the tilt of the pen, not just the pressure. Many of the brushes will respond to tilt as well. For example, in the Inkbox, the Brush Pen Dry series, or most of the brush pens, will allow you to hold your pen or stylus at a vertical and create one kind of a mark. You can also tilt away from vertical and get dry brush effects like this. Additionally, you can rotate the stylus to create different marks, all with the same tool. By combining pressure and tilt, you can get a wide range of effects with a single brush. For those of you who do own a tablet with tilt, try experimenting with brushes like the Tilterific pencil in the Megapack. It will allow you to hold your stylus at a vertical and draw a fine line, tilt away from vertical, and do shading, just like a real pencil. And you can control the angle by rotating your hand. Mixer brushes are one of the coolest things that ever existed in Photoshop, but a lot of people don't know they exist. They've been around since CS5, believe it or not. I've selected one of the brushes from the Megapack in the Real Oils category. It's called Bristle Cut. Now it looks like any other brush. I'm going to paint some strokes here with it, but I'm going to then select a secondary color. Why don't we get this sort of pinkish purple color? And I'm going to paint into the yellow, and you'll see what happens. The paint mixes together with every brush stroke. Now that's fun. So, this is what mixer brushes do. They mix the paint on the surface in real time. You can control a lot of the settings here at this top bar, but there are so many presets in the library now, you most likely won't have to play around with these too much, but feel free to experiment. One of the things I want to point out that's really neat about mixer brushes is you do not have to paint with one solid color at a time. For example, I currently have purple selected, but I can choose not to load solid colors only by deselecting this. Once I do that, I can select any color area here on my canvas by holding down the Option key on a Mac or the Alt key on a PC. And you'll notice that by holding those keys down and clicking, the area of color I now have selected has yellow in it and that pink. And when I make a new stroke, both of those colors are in play. Obviously, this creates lots of really amazing possibilities for your painting. And you can actually do some pretty cool dry media mixing effects as well. If I come up to the drawing box and select the Oil Pastel 2, I'll put down some of that pinkish purple color, and I'll grab some yellow. And when I paint into it, it mixes them, but not in the same way as the oil paint. It behaves like an oil pastel. So a little bit of pressure means I just graze the surface, and I take some of that pink with me. A lot of pressure means I pull more color in or out of one area. Try playing around with these. You're going to get some great effects and have a lot of fun. Mixer brushes are one of my favorite things, and like I said, a lot of people just don't know they're in Photoshop. With so many tools to choose from in the natural media categories, I would hate for any of you to miss out on some of the really fun special effects brushes you now have access to as well. That includes the spatter brushes, cross-hatching brushes, the rake brushes, and the halftones. I just want to take a quick look at the spatter and halftone brushes because they offer so many fun options. This one is called Wet Ink Random. Imagine just dropping some ink onto a damp piece of paper. Lots to play with here. Great for backgrounds and all kinds of other effects. Let's try another one. This is called pressure control. And what it does is it allows you, with the pressure, to control the spreading of the spatter. So light pressure means almost no spread whatsoever. Heavy pressure means lots of spread. By the way, there are over 50 of these, so there are tons to play with. This one is called Dampy Drip. These are not like regular stamps. They allow you to control what's happening with the paint, and they make perfectly random marks every time. Let's just do one more. Beautiful Mess. This is a really fun one. Imagine using this to do some kind of a effect for a rainy day, like some puddles splashing up. So much to play with. Now let's take a look at the halftone brushes. What makes these special is that you can control the density of the pattern that you're painting with pen pressure. So for example, I have Kyle's halftone Circle Range Tiny. Now, if I use light pressure, I get smaller dots. I'm bearing down, I'm going darker and darker and darker until I can get all the way to a solid black. This is really useful for people who do comics, poster art, any kind of illustration that involves pattern work. And there are over 100 of these in this set, so there's so much to play with. Just think of the possibilities here, having total control. Of course, if you want to be able to control the size of the brush with pen pressure, all you need to do is come to your brush settings, and under Shape Dynamics, right here, set the control to pen pressure, and just change the minimum diameter setting to whatever you like. So now, if I use light pressure, I'm painting with a smaller stamp. So I can paint into a really tiny area if I want. I can also actually make my brush size physically smaller. I use the left and right bracket keys to do this. And now I can really paint a tiny area if I want. But the size of the pattern remains consistent. One more set that I want to highlight is the Impressionist brushes. All of these brushes allow you to paint not only random brush marks, but the colors themselves will be changing in an analogous way. For example, I'll select the Impressionist chunk brush, and we'll do a sort of a reddish-orange color here. Now, when I paint with this, I'll see some yellow, some red, some orange. The colors are all closely related to each other, but with every new stroke, I get a new swatch of color. Beautiful, impressionistic brush strokes. Why don't we try one of the Seurat brushes? Those are really fun. We'll see the same kind of effect here. Pointillism, just like that. And what's really fun is I can actually turn on color dynamics to take advantage of my foreground and my background color. I'll go to my brush settings, select color dynamics, and here where it says foreground background jitter, I'm going to control that with pen pressure. Then I'll set my background color. I'm going to use a complementary. My foreground color is orange, my background color is blue. When I use less pressure, more of the blue is going to be the dominant color. When I use more pressure, the orange will be dominant. So, more pressure, orange. Less pressure, blue. This means I can do cool blends between the two by using a medium amount of pressure, like so. Lots and lots of possibilities here for some really vivid, beautiful paintings. You could do this with any of the brushes. Give it a try. I want you to keep a couple of things in mind when you're using custom brushes and doing your digital painting and drawing work. Try to use the stylus in the same manner that you would use your natural media tools. In other words, if you're using a brush, don't paint by scrubbing to fill an area. That's not what you would do with a paintbrush, unless you really didn't like your brushes and wanted to ruin the bristles. Instead, Think about how you make brush strokes, the direction you move the brush, how much pressure you use, and paint that way. What you wind up getting then is a result that feels like you have moved the stylus in different directions that are more natural, picked it up when needed, and then attacked the surface again. This is how you would paint in real life. This is how you should paint digitally. Then you will get better results. Most people, when they're starting out, just want to color and do a scrubbing action, no matter what tool they're using. You're not going to get the best results that way. For example, if I were using a pencil, I'll go ahead and go up to the drawing box and select the Perfect Pencil 2. If I draw with a pencil, I tend to use a line that's more exploratory, like this. So, shorter strokes, figuring out how I want to move through the forms. So I'm going to take that same action, that way of working, and carry it over into my digital tools. I'm also varying the pressure, the direction I move the tool, etc. You want to make sure that you're doing this when you draw digitally. If you want to get results that feel more natural, more interesting, this is what these tools are designed for. You can also use a brush as an eraser. All you have to do is change the brush mode to clear. So for example, if I have a shape and I fill it with color, if I want to modify that shape by erasing away part of it, I can use exactly the same brush to do the erasure. I'll change the mode to clear, then I can come up here and remove away the bit that I don't want anymore. Like so. This way, it still feels like the edges are correct, and all the properties of that brush are retained, only you're simply removing instead of adding color. Give that a try. The last thing I want to mention is how it's important to use color in a similar way to how you would use it with your natural media tools. This means you should have simple palettes and you should mix your colors whenever possible so that you have color harmony in your paintings. So here I have my 3 primaries, and I'm using from the Mega Pack the Creamy Variation brush, which is in the paint box. And I'm going to sample some red and then lightly paint over my yellow, and then sample again from the color that is overlaid. This gives me a nice orange. I can do the same with the yellow over the blue, and that gives me a nice green. Then I can do the blue over the red, and that gives me a nice violet. And I can continue to build my colors out this way. By painting this way, I think you're just going to have a much better harmony in your colors. Your paintings will feel right. You won't be doing a lot of guesswork. And besides, it's really difficult to choose the right color when you pull up the color picker and you're looking at millions and millions of color options. So why don't you give this a try and see how you like it. Thanks for watching, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy these hundreds of new tools that are available to all Creative Cloud subscribers.